A disclaimer, I played all these games back to back over a 2 hour session, so it may affect how I talk about them. Hello, my name is Nate Cowan, and this will be my VR Critiques Part 1 from my multimodal design class. The first game I played was Oculus First Contact, which acts as an introduction to VR. I did have some very limited experience with VR beforehand, but I wanted to dip my toes before I jumped into the deep end. It is a very complex game, which is the benefit of just getting a handle to the controls and actually getting used to a VR space rather than just throwing you into Modern Warfare or whatever. And the game is very reliant on you interacting with a single robot NPC. I felt this showed a lot of the interactability of VR as the many different actions you could do, from shooting with darts, waving your hand, or throwing discs at him. All the responses coded into the game as a reaction to the freeform actions that VR allows for. Personally really enjoyed it, even if it was just a glorified tutorial. There's stuff like digital butterflies that can come out, you can plug, weird floppy disks into other things. It's there's a lot of just random gizmos for you just to play around with. I do think it handles its introduction to VR very well, however, it is very shallow as an experience. You're just rooted to one spot as you're just messing around with things, and eventually you just run out of things to throw at the robot or do whatever the heck else. And it relies on other games to essentially get you used to moving around in a VR space. I felt, though, if it could do one thing better, it'd be to allow you to move around and experience a VR world beyond just a single space in a more comfortable environment where it's literally meant as a tutorial rather than jumping into some other game and you're just having to learn how to navigate in VR, and it may potentially overwhelm newer players to VR. A sequel or separate game mode could help alleviate that. Virtual reality takes the interactable environment of Oculus First Contact, but adds a unique narrative on top of it. Released in 2017, it has almost near universal acclaim, and for good reason. The game has a unique wit and humor on top of its diverse interactions that can occur across the game, from waiting too long to leave a world, and AI questioning if you're still there, to slapping burnt toast on a piece of butter who has a fetish for perfect toast. The game nearly has it all and more. VR was new around this time, so the gameplay is mostly the player just walking around, picking up objects, and fulfilling basic needs. This is to the player's benefit, though, as it lets them experience the story and just play around with the wacky interactions and not have to have much prior VR experience. So one interaction that stood out to me is just this boat, yes, a boat, was damn, you could really just reach out to the sun and pluck it. And my immediate reaction was to point at the sun, grab it, and bring it down towards the earth. And the dude's no, stop. And he has to reset the whole world. I don't think he resets the whole world, but stuff like that where you're interacting with the world and then the world gives a response, I feel, is what this game does extremely well, and it really immerses you within that VR experience. It really makes you feel like you are there, and it addresses you like you are the person you, rather than, I don't know, some individual character. It is an incredibly immersive game. One small critique: the controls for it can be wacky at times because you put on these in-game VR headsets to essentially go to different worlds. However, sometimes whenever you're pulling on objects, if you pull back in a certain way, you'll yank the VR headset off of you, and you're bro, you're just scrambling to go put it back on so you can actually play the game. And also, near the end of the game, you get this vacuum, which sucks up basically anything, which is really cool. However, the game basically chooses what you can and cannot suck up, and it kind of removes the interactability of the game. And the limited VR perspective, it just means if you get in an open world with the vacuum, I'm trying to vacuum up random things, but this is the thing the game wants me to vacuum up. It wants me to go over to this thing and vacuum it up, and I feel that's just a bit of a weakness of the game where it doesn't consider that the player may just go wander off on it their own. Vader Immortal Part 1 was another game I played, and for context, I am a massive Star Wars fan. It was released around 2019, and I personally really enjoyed my time with the game. The visuals are the most realistic and the most technically impressive of any VR game, with these very realistic models, fantastic character design, fantastic voice acting. Whenever this Interdictor Star Destroyer goes over you in the first, part of the game. It's like seeing that in VR is such a cool experience. Uh, and the story basically revolves around like Vader, formerly Anakin, trying to revive his dead wife Padme, and he captures you in order to do so with magic gizmos and Mustafar and whatever. Sounds awesome on paper, and it is. Even if the most you do in episode 1 is open a bunch of doors and you do a little bit of lightsaber combat, it keeps it unique and interesting throughout the whole experience. However, I feel like the medium of VR hurts it more than it helps. The controls are very smooth. It's very tight, climbing on things or opening doors. It's like it's its own unique puzzle that you don't really do in most games. However, the main issue is the player is the protagonist, not the character the player plays, the player. It like assumes the player is meant to be the character that the game is making you play as. I know that's maybe a little bit confusing, but it essentially removes any agency within it because like in the Star Wars world, you're not going to start doing a calculator motion on Vader's chest buttons or just start robot slicing your robot companion. So they don't let the character do that, and so the interactability is gone. However, the player is essentially the character rather than like the character. So the player can have their own unique different interactions to how they experience things. Like they can go, oh, lol the Mao, Vader's cringe at his dead wife dying. Redundant. Or they could be drawing smiley faces in the wall with their lightsaber. But the world doesn't interact with that. You're mostly just a passive observer, despite the fact that characters will specifically address you and everything. And not making the player a character with their own personality and interactions almost removes you more from the experience, as you're more just observing, but you're being referred to, and I feel it uses the experience of you in the world as VR almost to the story's detriment. There's like back and forth dialogue, but the player doesn't interact with them. It's mostly your robot companion who, after Vader lets out an anguished scream about the immense guilt and rage over killing his own wife, the robot just goes, well, I wouldn't want to be here. It's like, I don't know. I felt the story had a lot of potential. It just was a bit squandered. Combat as well. It's a lot of fun swinging around the lightsaber. Like, it really makes you feel like Batman. It really makes you feel like you're swinging around a lightsaber and deflecting blaster bolts. However, since the only movement, at least in this time, was teleporting around, there isn't any room for like interesting combat, and the ability for the player just to like do whatever they want with their lightsaber, I think hinders the programmers. So what ends up happening is the only thing the player can do is stand in one place while the enemies attack you. You deflect them 3 times, and then you gotta hit them 3 times, but you can't really do your own unique attacks. Like, you can't do a thrust or anything. You have to do 1, 2, 3 wide slashes, and that'll kill the enemy. And just like, it feels very cool, but once you get into a segment where you're fighting like 20 robots at the same time, it ultimately ends up feeling very shallow and repetitive. Like, I feel like if they made it in some other medium, the combat could have been more interesting. Where it's like, the strengths of VR are like on full display here with just the immersive Star Wars world and everything. However, the limitations of VR are nowhere more prevalent than it is in Vader Immortal, and the limits here are stretched to their absolute limits. The final game I want to talk about is a Job Simulator. For context, this is about like 2 hours into my session. I had a massive headache, maybe some mild amount of VR sickness, I'm not sure. I chose the cooking simulator for Job Simulator, and I personally did not have a lot of fun with it. Job Simulator relies a lot on the interactability of VR, much like Oculus First Contact and virtual reality. However, it lacks that responsiveness. it doesn't give you like any real tutorials or anything. It's just like it throws you into it, gives you a lot of different tools to work with, and I think that's pretty cool because a lot of the games they'll drip feed you stuff, but this one really allows you just to like explore and see what you can do. Like, oh, we got a stove, we got a grill, we got a sink, we got a blender, we got fruit, and it's not like open the pantry, obtain meat, close the pantry, put on grill for exactly 30 seconds. It's nothing like that. However, I'm not sure if it's because of this, but it lacks the responsiveness that I talked about previously in this video. It's just like, the famous meat connoisseur is like, oh, I want like your perfect steak. So you make him a steak, but I hand him a raw meat and like a burnt meat, and he just is like, ah, yes, this is the perfect meat. Oh, your restaurant is so good. Or it's like, I'll hand someone a soup made of like pizza cookbook, lemon, and like a spoon, and they're just like, there's no reaction to it or anything. They just kind of like take it, and they don't react to the player's antics when the game seems to be built around like the stupidity of a job work environment and the hilarity they can ensure from it. You're just kind of like doing normal things. I didn't play super long of it because of the headache that I had, and perhaps like I had one experience where it was like, find this item, and like I spent like a good 2-3 minutes just kind of like searching around for this item until I just found like a lever tucked in a corner that allowed me to flip the pantry into like a fridge and find the item. And I just kind of got annoyed through the experience because it just wasn't giving me any hits, even whenever I was like stuck for a few minutes just trying to find the item that I was looking for. So while I do like just the freedom, ultimately it leaves you rooted in one place, and it doesn't use that ability to have like so many unique interactions. Like he comes back and is like, they put lemon in my steak. Why did you put the lemon in my steak? Instead, it's just like, ah, yes, the steak is so delicious. Just no matter what you put in it, you can put a fucking newspaper on it. You can put a piece of toast on it. You could put like raw bacon on it, and you're just going to love it either way. It's just like, I don't know. It removes that level of interactability that makes you immersed in it and really feels like, you're participating in the world rather than just like, oh, I'm performing some actions, and it just doesn't feel that engaging.